Okay, well, good afternoon. We're here today with David Wells at Henosis Mushrooms. My name is Carla Keene, and I work with the Montgomery County Extension Office in Clarksville, Tennessee. Welcome to our Slow Your Roll, and today our topic is mushroom inoculation, and David's telling us all about that.
Hey everybody, I'm David Wells with the Montgomery County Extension Agency for Slow Your Roll. We're going to be doing some mushroom production, and right now I'm going to show you how to do mushroom production with sawdust and other agricultural waste so that you can upcycle sawdust and soybean hulls and cotton hulls into gourmet mushrooms for resale. So we're going to start out with just kind of naming the equipment up here. We've got these plastic bags that you can get from a company called Unicorn, and you can order them by the thousands, or you can find somebody else who wants to sell them to you by the dozens for about 50 cents. Now, these patches are for air circulation, for the mushrooms to breathe oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide as they're decomposing sawdust and other agricultural waste like soybean hulls. So this is my company here, Henosis. We are a full service mushroom company. We grow mushrooms for restaurants, and we also provide micro hobbyists or mushroom nerds the supplies they need to do their own mushroom production. So today we are going to make a grow bag for people to learn how to produce their own mushrooms in their house. So again, going down the line here with the supplies, we've got our mushroom bags, and then we have a pressure cooker, and then we've got soybean hulls as a source of nitrogen, and then we have poplar sawdust as a source of carbon for the mushrooms to eat. Now, what you want to do is you kind of want to start out slow as a beginning farmer. You really want to figure out your formula on the soybean hulls and the sawdust. So one of these pressure cookers can hold about 3 bags, 3 5-pound bags of what we call substrate. And you're going to take the sawdust and the soybean hulls and inoculate it with grain that has fungus growing on it. So the formula for 1 bag of mushroom substrate is 1 pound of sawdust and 1 pound of soybean hulls, and mushrooms need water, so 3.5 pounds of water. So you're going to have a nice mixing tub. And what we're going to do first is we're going to take this, we're going to dump the water in, and then we're going to weigh out our soybeans. And again, 1 pound of soybean hulls. So, tear that. One pound of soybean hulls. You're really going to dump that in the water so you can get those dry pellets all saturated. Give it a nice mix. Just let that sit for a minute. And then we're going to measure out some sawdust. Now you want to use hardwood sawdust, that being oak, poplar, maple, and when you talk to your distributor, your vendor, you don't want to have any cedar or black walnut in the mix, because that's going to inhibit fungi from producing on the substrate. So again, we have tulip poplar sawdust, or poplar sawdust, I apologize. So 1 scoop is about 7 ounces. So we got 14. So we need 2 more ounces. That's good enough. So we've got 1 pound of so we got our mix of sawdust and soybean hulls. That's a pound a piece, and then we've got about 3.5 pounds of water, and we're mixing it up in the tub here. We're looking at a saturation rate of 60%, and one of the ways that you can kind of test if you've got too much water is give it a good hand test or a hand squeeze, and if you see 2 drops of water that come out, that's about 60%. If it's a long stream of water, you've got too much water in there, and what you would want to add is probably a little more sawdust. You can get a little more scientific with it. When you're working with your substrates, if you want to test the baseline saturation rate, you can take an ounce or a measured weight and throw it in the microwave until you can't squeeze any more water out of it, and that's your baseline. So you take that weight where it's wet, you put it in the microwave until you don't have any more moisture in it, and then you weigh it again, and you can find the ratio of your moisture level. But just baseline, give a nice squeeze test, and if too much water is coming out, more than 2 drops, you've got too much water in there, and you want to add more sawdust. So the next thing you want to do is you want to fill your bags, and again, we're looking for about 5.5 pounds. So we just tear our scale here, and you can use a scoop, you can use a pitcher, but this is stuff that you can do at home. You don't have to have any equipment. It's typically about 3 scoops. We'll give you 5. So we're sitting at 3 pounds. You can use a horse trough if you need more space to do this in. That's 4 pounds, 11 ounces. That's 5 pounds. It's all empty. So we got, again, 1 pound of sawdust, 1 pound of soybean hulls, and 3.5 pounds of water. Now, if you're adding nitrogen or a soybean hull or a cottonseed hull, you're going to want to sterilize it, because all the other microorganisms want to eat that nitrogen as much as the fungi. So what we use is we use a pressure cooker. You can use your standard at-home in-kitchen pressure cooker. This one that we have is the Presto pressure cooker, and it's a little easier than the American. It's got a little gasket here. You can just screw that top down. Now, one thing you need to make sure of is that you've got enough water in there. So you need about 2 inches of water, which is about up to your knuckle in your hand. So you want to fill that with water. You can fit about 2 bags in this size pressure cooker, but if you're using a 41 quart pressure cooker, you can put about 8 bags in there, 8 to 9 bags. Now, the more bags you have, the longer you have to cook. So for 1 bag, we can put this in the pressure cooker with about 2 inches of water for about 45 minutes, and that will sterilize that substrate of sawdust and soybean hulls, so that after an hour or 45 minutes to an hour, we can pull this out of the pressure cooker, and then we can inoculate it with grain spawn. Now, we make grain spawn at Henosis. There's also several other companies you can buy grain spawn from, depending upon where you're at. Field and Forest in Wisconsin, Earth Angel Mushroom out of Missouri, North Spore out of Maine. It really depends on like how far you want to ship stuff, because that's going to increase your shipping cost. But it's best to buy grain spawn unless you've got a really nice lab, because this is the most important part. If it's got contamination on it because it wasn't in a really clean lab, then you're gonna really mess up your mushroom production and not produce any mushrooms. So unless you've got a really nice clean lab, just buy your grain spawn. It comes in 5-pound bags, and what you want to do is you're gonna open this bag up, and with oyster mushrooms you can do this in the open air. With other mushrooms like shiitakes or lion's mane, they're not as vigorous, so you really want to do this in front of a HEPA filter, which is going to provide clean air for you when you do this part of the transition. And you're going to use about 2 tablespoons per 5-pound bag, up to about a 1/4 cup. So a tablespoon is roughly as much as what's in this quart jar. So you can do grain spawn in quart jars if you want, but the 5-pound bag is a little more efficient. So we've got lion's mane grain spawn in here, but again, you want to use oyster mushrooms in the open air. So again, you want to try to work as clean as possible in this. You don't want to stick your hand in this bag after it's come out of the pressure cooker. Even though it's open air, you want to try to remain as sterile as possible. And then you're just going to dump that grain in there. Set that aside. And then you can close off this bag with a plastic sealer. We do not have a plastic sealer out here with today. Or you can just roll it up and let that filter patch. As you can see, this filter patch here is so it doesn't allow a lot of air to come out. But you would seal that up, and then you're going to shake that spawn around so that it reaches all the surfaces of the bag. But you could use any standard sealer that you would, you can get them on uline.com, or you can use the one that you seal meat with, just as long as it's sealed up. Or you can just use fold this twice and put a little clip on it. And again, if you're using oyster mushrooms, it's not too big of a deal. Even if it gets contaminated, you'll still produce oysters and you can get a nice return. So we've got our soybean hulls, we've got our sawdust, and then we have our mushroom spawn on grain. And that's going to sit for 2 weeks. And you're going to want to put it in the dark. And the fungi is going to colonize that substrate till that whole bag is all nice and white. And until that bag is all nice and white, you won't be able to grow any mushrooms on it. It needs to fully colonize the bag, and then you can put it in a little grow room, which you could use a little tub here, and you could mist it after you cut an X in the bag to allow oxygen to penetrate the fungus, and then it realizes that it has an opening to produce fruiting bodies. And so the main components to allow these bags to fruit are oxygen and water. And so if you had a little mono tub here, is what they call it in the industry, and you gave it a nice mist once a day, you're gonna allow those baby mushrooms to produce. So we've got some primordia here on this bag. So this is the first stage that you'll start seeing mushrooms come to life. So over the course of 2 weeks, we're misting the bag with water, or you're spraying it with a hose, depending on how big your operation is. And then little baby mushrooms come up as you're misting. They grow to an adolescent phase. This is the end of its teenage life here, and once these caps start flattening out, it's time to pick. And so after a 2-week process of putting it in your grow room, it's going to produce mushrooms, and you're going to get on average about a pound the first harvest. And that was just a really quick twist and pull. So let's weigh this puppy out. Seven ounces. It's not the best run, but that's 7 ounces of mushrooms. And you're gonna let this block rest after your first harvest, and you're gonna keep misting. And after another 2 weeks, you should get a second harvest out of this. Now, oyster mushrooms are pretty easy. Some mushrooms require that you do a temperature change. So for oysters, the primordial formation is going to take place at a temperature range between 65 and 85 degrees, depending on the variety of oysters that you grow. So there's temperate climate oysters, which is this gray dove here. And then all those nice pink and yellow ones that you see at the farmers markets, those are tropical varieties. So those tropical varieties really want to fruit at 65 to 80. And then once you start getting into 85, you're really competing with those tropical contaminants, bacteria, black molds. So they're not the easiest ones to grow. Also, that being said, is that your shelf life is compromised. So the tropical varieties don't last as long in the refrigerator, which is fine if you just want to eat them at home. But if you're trying to take them to market and they're sitting in the open air and it's hot like it is today in June, they're really going to suffer, and you're not going to want to take those back home. So I like to grow the temperate climate ones. So the gray doves, the pearls, they really last a long time. They've got a great flavor. And after that's all said and done, you've got your second harvest after 4 weeks, and you can throw this in your compost pile, and it's already primarily decomposed, and it makes for great compost, and you can apply that to your rose garden if you'd like. Thank you so much. We just did a class on inoculating with these bags here for in-home greenhouse production, and now I'm going to talk about how to introduce mushrooms into your garden beds to increase soil fertility and increase vegetable production. Mushrooms are a different kingdom than Plantia and Animalia. They are the great unifiers of the world, so everything is connected to fungus in one way or the other, whether you eat it. We have fungus in our microbial gut, and plants have a symbiotic relationship with fungi too. Fungi break down organic matter, and so we can grow fungus right into our gardens using what we call mushroom mulches. Again, the mushroom that we're going to use today is called a wine cap mushroom. And wine cap mushrooms eat straw, they eat hardwood, sawdust, and wood chips. So a lot of the stuff that we sort of take for granted, we can use right at home. And if anybody's ever done lasagna gardening, this lends itself to that practice. And lasagna gardening is just using a mulch system of cardboard or newspaper and straw and water. You could call the cardboard the noodle, and you could call the wood chips the meat, but the cheese is the mushroom spawn. So this is what's needed in the lasagna gardening to increase your microbial levels, to increase the soil fertility in that mulching system. And as that stuff breaks down, it's going to turn into water, and it's going to actually provide carbon dioxide for the plants, because mushrooms breathe in oxygen, and they exhale carbon dioxide. So you've got a nice level of fungi on the ground here, and it's exuding carbon dioxide and water. And then over time, every 10 inches of mulch that you have is going to break down into 2 inches of topsoil over 4 years. So the main benefit, though, to lasagna gardening is that you're trying to suppress weeds. So straw does a fabulous job of suppressing weeds. So as a young farmer, if you're trying to grow a nice cash crop, I mean, one of your biggest overhead costs is pulling weeds. Well, if you can add value and maybe return the cost of mulching by growing mushrooms on it, then it's a win-win. So today what we have is our herb garden, and we've got some tomatoes here, and we've got some lemon balm. And this last fall what we did was we made a wine cat bed. So we have our bag of spawn, and we've got our wood chips. So the wood chips you want to use are hardwood chips. You don't want to use cedar. You don't want to use black walnut. You want to use oaks, hackberries, sweet gums, anything that's not really an evergreen crop. Now, if you've got a big truckload of wood chips that come in from an arborist or the landfill, and if it has a little bit of evergreen wood chips in it, it's okay. But if it's primarily hardwood, you should be good to go. The first thing you want to do is you want to soak your wood chips, and we've got a tub here that we've been soaking wood chips in for 24 hours. Okay, so our supplies for this is we're going to have cardboard. You know, you want to use the biggest cardboard piece you have. It needs to be around 50 square feet. And then we're going to need wood chips. And again, you want to use hardwood chips, no cedar, no black walnut. And you can get a nice head start if you soak these wood chips overnight. So for at least up to 24 hours, you don't really need to go over that. What's going to happen is that's going to create an anaerobic environment, and you're going to start off with a clean slate with your wood chips. Because the wood chips are submerged in this water, it's suffocating all the other microbes that are existing on that wood chip substrate. And then also it's giving that fungus a nice saturation point that it's going to have something to drink while it consumes the wood chips. So what you want to start out with is lay your bed down. Now again, you're going to use around 50 square feet per 5-pound bag of sawdust. And you can make your own sawdust at home if you watch the first segment there. And you're gonna lay your noodle down like you would lasagna. And then you're gonna put chips down, just a little base layer, and then you're gonna open up your sawdust spawn. It's going to be kind of clumpy. So what you want to do is just rub that spawn in, break it up to as many smaller particles as you can. And then you're going to add around 6 inches or maybe 3 inches for the first layer of lasagna, and then you're just going to cake layer the rest, again breaking that spawn up into little particles here. And add another 3 inches of straw or wood chips, or a combination of the two. And then after you've got 6 inches, that's the depth that you really want to go in a formation on a flat surface. You can go up to 10 inches if you've got a downgrade of sorts. And then you're just going to keep this bed watered. If it gets too dry, you really want to water it maybe once a week. But we have a lot of rain here in Tennessee, so that shouldn't be a problem. The only time that we have problems with drought is in the fall. But that mushroom bed should be pretty established if you do this in the spring. And it's going to allow that mycelium or the fungi to encapsulate each little wood chip. So we installed this bed last fall, and it was primarily wood chips, and we had a little bit of straw, and we got some fruiting this spring. We harvested about 3 pounds of mushrooms. And so as you can see here, if you peel this back, you've got some really nice myceliated substrate of straw, wood chips, really nice black soil. See if I can't find a worm here. I'm not going to get lucky this time. Yeah, they are. They know it's hot out. So it's made a really nice myceliated mat. And we did some research with the SARE organization, or Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education Department, on using mushroom mulches in the hoop house to see if we could increase production, increase soil fertility, all while growing gourmet mushrooms for resale. We did not have great luck in this production style, so I do not recommend that you try this in a hoop house or a greenhouse. Rather, if you are in an open field, if you're going to be mulching anyways, you can add sawdust spawn to that system. And another mushroom company out of Wisconsin did a test in the open air with their tomato crops, and they found that the tomatoes were healthier, and they actually had a larger production of fruit for their tomato crop. So it adds a really beneficial layer to crop production. And again, you are fertilizing over time as that fungi breaks that organic matter down and provides water, provides nutrients and oxygen for your plants, and you don't have to weed as much. Let's see here. So let's say that you're a new gardener and you want to get started, you're eager to get a garden going, but maybe it's not the time, maybe it's not the season. You don't have your garden bed laid out, you don't have the soil tilled or anything, but you can use this as a preliminary stage to suppress the weeds. If you do the lasagna gardening, you can suppress the weeds and then plant your crops later in the season, and you'll have a clean slate. If you don't have a site picked out, and let's say you want to get your fungus growing first, you can do this bunker spawn method, and you can use a plastic contractor's bag, and you can fill it with wet wood chips, and you can cake layer wet wood chips or straw, brush that spawn in there, and then over a course of a month, you've taken 1 bag of spawn and created about 8 bags of spawn. And so mushrooms grow exponentially, so every bag that you've got can do maybe a half a cubic yard of wood chips. But if you do this method, you can grow this in a closed environment, and you're going to have a pure substrate of about 80 pounds of mushroom spawn. So with this bag, we can inoculate at least 2 cubic yards of wood chips or straw. So you can really maximize this one $25 bag into about $100 worth of mushroom spawn. So you can really stretch that out. You can really apply this at every stage of gardening. If you've got an established garden, it's a little more difficult to add the mulch and the substrate. But if you're working with a clean slate, it's a lot easier to plug those plants in the succession of your garden, increasing the fertility and the production of your crops. So when we're working with our wine cap mushrooms, where we access the materials to do these wine cap beds, thankfully Tennessee is a big agroforestry state. We've got the second biggest milling industry in the country, so we've got a lot of access to hardwood sawdust. We've got a lot of access to wood chips, and so where do you find your substrate? Well, you can look at a map, you can Google arborist, you can Google wood mills, and you should have a whole host of companies that are more than willing to give you this stuff for free. So you can ask them to do a chip drop dump, and they may give you more wood chips than what you want. You don't really want to work with more than about a cubic yard of wood chips if you're only doing one bag. If you're looking for something a little bit less, you can always ask an arborist to hop in his truck, and you can get bags worth of wood chips, sawdust from wood mills. Now, with each truck and with each mill, you really want to discern that you don't have any treated lumber. You can't use treated lumber, and you really want to make sure again that the hardwood is not cedar and it's not black walnut. A little bit of mix is okay, but more than 20%, and you're not going to have the fungal growth that you want. Dirt is okay. Branches, leaf matter's fine with this kind of production. When you are sourcing your materials, you don't really want to go over 6 months worth of time with the sawdust or the wood chips. Then you've got too much competition. You may be able to lessen the competition if you do a bath, a submersion of the wood chips, because it's going to kill off those microbes and give you a cleaner slate. But again, over time, they're eating the same substrate that you are, so it's less nutrient rich than if it was fresh. So we're in the cedar grove here at Henosis, and we are going to be showing you how to do mushroom logs. We are in a great state to do that because we've got a lot of access to hardwoods. And so if you've got a wood lot and you're waiting for that timber crop to come in that 30-year cycle, one of the things you can do is to utilize those shrub trees that you can cut down to thin the forest out. Now that's a lot of work, so if you want to get some return on that, you can take those sweet gum logs that are not really used in the timber industry, and you can grow shiitake mushrooms, oyster mushrooms. If you've got maple that you're not trying to use and you need to thin that out, you can grow lion's mane mushrooms. So we're going to go over the tools of the trade. They're going to lessen that workload on you, make things a little more efficient, and then we're going to go over the gestation phase of the logs, and then we'll go over how to cultivate the mushrooms and what to do to make those mushrooms grow. So the types of wood, again, that you want to use are white oak, red oak, maple, and sweet gum, and there's benefits to either variety. Your white oak is going to last a lot longer, and you're going to get a little more mushrooms out of it relative to sweet gum, but the thing is, it's going to take a lot longer for those white oak logs to produce. The white oak logs or maple or some of the harder woods are typically going to take around 18 months to produce mushrooms, whereas your softer woods like your sweet gum and your silver maple are going to produce mushrooms in around 9 months. That's if you take care of your logs. So you want to look for logs that are about 6 inches to 3 inches in diameter. You're looking at, maybe a tree that's 40 feet high, and a sweet gum that's around that size will produce around 10 logs. And the industry separates mushroom logs from regular logs, as we call them, bolts, because there's a whole new industry that's coming around bolts, in the sense that if we don't have the means to cut our own trees down, we can hire another farmer or another agroforestry agent to cut that wood down, and it provides another source of income for somebody who has a wood lot, because each log can be worth up to $3 or $6 per log depending on the size and if they're delivered. So this is about a $6 log. This is a maple log that was cultivated out in Cheatham County. So we sell mushroom logs, but I encourage a lot of woodlot owners to harvest those logs and maybe try to sell them, resell. I think it's a great source of income. If you're not set up to do firewood, it could be a lot more profitable for that. Now, there's a certain time that you want to cultivate logs. Unfortunately, we're in the summertime now, so this is not the best mushroom log. The times that you want to harvest your logs are fall, just as the leaves have fallen, up till late winter, early spring. So around November up until maybe early April is the time frame that you want to cultivate mushroom logs or bolts. Now, you really want to pick those trees that are healthy. You don't want to pick a tree that is that has any sort of fungal growth on it. If it's got moth on the north side, that's fine. But you don't want to harvest anything that's got a dead branch. You want something that's fresh, and you want to cut those logs into 3 to 4 feet sections. And you can save those logs. You don't have to inoculate them right away, but you want to keep them off the ground. You want to store them in a dry place, and you should be able to inoculate them even after 3 months. And so we're going to talk about the tools of the trade. We don't have our chainsaw with us today to show you how to cut down the logs, but there's tools that are developed for mushroom production that are significantly going to cut down on your labor cost. You can use a regular drill bit on a regular drill, but it's going to be about 4 times as long to make a mushroom log, as opposed to these specialty bits that come out of Japan that are designed to be 1 inch in depth and about 12 millimeters in width. And that is the perfect size for your mushroom inoculator. And this is about 1 inch in depth and about 12.5 millimeters wide. And it's got a little injection port here that you can inject mushroom spawn into the log. And then you gotta have mushroom wax. You can use cheese wax, you can use beeswax. I don't really recommend the paraffin wax. It doesn't last as long as the cheese wax or the beeswax. And then you're gonna have a paintbrush here to put over the holes that you've dug out with the cheese wax. And then you're gonna have your mushroom spawn. And this is a 5-pound bag, and you can get 20 logs out of each 5-pound bag. You might be able to get 25 if you're dealing with smaller logs. And again, you're really looking for about a 3-inch to 6-inch diameter on the logs. You can do larger, but it's going to be a lot more cumbersome to carry around, and you're really not going to want to lug around a 12-inch log. So we're using a regular drill here. It's an impact drill. You can use kind of a regular drill as well, like one of these. You really want to have it hooked up to a cord. The cordless ones run out and they're not as powerful over time. There's also another tool that you can use, which is a modified angle grinder. Modified in the sense that it's got this special bit here that you can connect the drill bit onto. And the benefits of this is that it's a higher RPM, and so you can really get into the log efficiently and really boogie and get your log plugged in 10 minutes as opposed to maybe 45 minutes if you were using a regular drill. Today, for simplicity, we're going to use this high impact drill. It's cordless. We're not making 20 logs today. But you want to work with a table too that's nice height so that you can work ergonomically. You're not going to be bending down and spending too much energy lifting logs. Some people may put their logs on a roller system so they can easily flip it around, but for simplicity, we're just going to work with this table today. When we do our logs too, just to go back to the health, you don't see any deep fissures, you don't see any deep cracks in this log. This is a really fresh log. It was cut yesterday and it's not dried out. There's no visible fungi or bacteria on it. It's a really healthy sugar maple. So word of the wise, get your wax heated up before you start the whole thing. And you're going to use, this is the hang loose symbol. This is about 3 inches. We can do the itsy bitsy spider on the log here. You're gonna drill a hole about every 3 inches. So we're going to start the drill before we hit the log. So we've got a hole every 3 inches here, and you really want to do the whole log. You want to drill it out and save time on switching tools out. You don't want to drill and then come back a week later and plug it. That's not really efficient, and it's going to allow for other things to consume that nice sugar sap in there. So after you've got the whole log drilled out, again, you can stagger the holes just to increase the surface area. So staggering, meaning you can form a diamond pattern on the logs here. And then you've got an inoculation stick. You're gonna stab that mushroom spawn, and then it's gonna make a nice little plug that's gonna go in the depth of that hole you just plugged. So we'll do that again. Mushroom spawn. I'm going to stick that over the hole. You're going to keep working down those drilled spots. So we're working with an oyster mushroom right now. But again, you can use shiitakes on oaks and maples. Oyster's a little more versatile as far as log species go. They don't really care too much. You can even use hackberry or sugarberry for oyster mushrooms. We've got most of our holes plugged here. This wax is nice and hot, and we're going to go in. This is the thing that takes the longest. So if you can get a nice little row of people working with you, about 2 or 3 people, you can do this really efficiently. So you're going to go in there, you're going to wax each hole, and you really want to wax a nice section around each plug. What's happening there is you're keeping it moist, you're keeping that plug spawn nice and wet so he can start eating and consuming this log, and you're also keeping bugs and you're also keeping birds out. I've seen more chickadee birds tap in here and get all that mycelium out because it makes for a good nest, and it's a nice glue substance for them. So you've got everything drilled, plugged, and waxed. So what do you do next? Well, the mushroom needs to consume the wood, so you're going to need a nice shady spot for your mushrooms to consume the wood. And you can use 50% shade cloth if you don't have a nice forestry canopy to work with. And you really want to not only have the top canopy shaded out, but you really want to have that western face shaded. Every time that log sees light, it's going to increase that breakdown of the wood. So you really want to have it covered up. You can also use burlap sacks to keep the birds out and to keep it out of the sun. And again, the more sun, the more often that log's going to dry out. In Tennessee here, we've got enough rain during most of the season. You're not going to have to worry too much about your logs drying out. We're in our cedar grove here. This is a pretty straight run of cedars. They kind of run a nice straight line here. So what we've done in the past is we've hooked up sprinkler systems just with black pipe and just standard greenhouse misters, and then we put it up on each little section here, and if it should dry out, we just turn the water on and we don't have to hand water. You really want to minimize workload here. This stuff is going to be in gestation phase for at least 9 to 18 months. So this is the most critical time of the log's life that it gets fully colonized, so that you can harvest mushrooms for the next 3 years. Now, each log will probably produce around a pound, maybe a pound and a half per year. The less the longer the life. The less the life of the log. So that third year, you're not really going to cultivate as many mushroom varieties, and you might have some competition as the mushrooms are growing. You might see some turkey tail, you might see some false turkey tail, but the benefits of shiitakes and oyster mushrooms is that they're pretty easy to discern between the competitive fungi. So you're not really going to harvest anything that's going to kill you. That being said, you should check your books. You should check the taxonomical differences with the mushrooms. If you're unsure of one, give it a good look over, check your books, check the spore prints, but more than likely you're going to be fine. A shiitake mushroom is a shiitake mushroom is a shiitake mushroom, and an oyster is pretty much an oyster as well. So going back to the gestation phase, what's the best way to store your logs as they are colonizing with mushrooms? We've got some logs back here that we can look at. Okay, so we're under the cedar grove here. We've inoculated our logs with oyster mushrooms or shiitake mushrooms, and now we're in the most critical phase of production where we are allowing these logs to colonize with fungi. Now, you want to be in a deep shaded spot. You can use the shade cloth, or you can use the cedars that we have in our land, and you really want to be mindful about where they're located. Are they close to a water source? Should you need to water their logs? Are they close to your house so that you can come out and see how the logs are producing? And also, you want to be really mindful about the square footage you're using at this phase, because you really don't want to have a bunch of logs set up that you're going to have to water with a water hose. You really want to keep them in a centralized location. You can monitor them easily, so you can lay them down on a pallet, and you can do a crisscross section here, stack them up, maybe up to 6 logs, 5 or 6 logs per pallet, and maybe no more than 4 feet high. You could use a ratchet strap, keep them together, and on the pallet, if you ever need to move them, you can take your tractor and you can scoop them up with the forks and then move them around. That way, you can minimize workload, minimize handling, and then you're really working with the fungi, because as this fungi consumes the log, you can see this white mycelium here. That's all shiitake fungi that's colonized this wood. Well, it's also gonna reach out and hit this wood next to it. So you're really increasing the surface area at which the fungi can consume these logs, minimizing workload. And should you have to water, you only have to water this pallet, and you don't have to water a whole linear foot. So let's just say these logs are about almost a year old. So you're going to try to check the health of the wood over time to see where you're at and whether or not you can fruit these logs. So as you can see on this log here, it's got this white fungus growing. That's pretty indicative that it's a healthy log. You can see that the mycelium that's grown from the bark. Now, to go back on taking care of this log, you don't want to handle it so much that you're breaking off the bark. The bark is the sugar that mycelium is going to be eating. It's going to be protecting it from the elements and holding moisture in. So minimize handling, keep it in the shade, and then over time check to see how the mycelium is going on the ends. Now this log is probably ripe for producing mushrooms, and so when you want to produce the mushrooms, you can either let the logs produce themselves, let nature take its course. We didn't get any mushrooms this spring, but I bet if I soak this log, soaking meaning if I submerge it in water for 16 hours and then pull it out, we would start seeing little baby mushrooms or primordia. And then over the next week, those mushrooms are going to grow into full-size cap mushrooms, and we should be able to harvest a half a pound to a pound per log. Now, you wouldn't really want to fruit them in the crosshatch style. You really want to lay them out after you've soaked them. Increase the airflow, increase your ability to harvest the mushrooms should they fruit. And you should get one flush after at least 2 weeks, and then if you want to, you could do a succession of flushes if the weather is right by soaking these logs in succession. So soak it for 16 hours, pull the log out, prop it up against the stands here, let that mushroom produce in 2 weeks, and then you can soak it again after that for another 16 hours and get the life of the log. Now the limitations on the fruiting is the weather. So there's different strains of mushrooms, specifically with shiitake having been cultivated for thousands of years. We have developed strains that are good for cold weather. There's all weather strains, and then there's summer strains. I prefer the all-weather strains for Tennessee because we have nice little ends on the fall and spring seasons. We don't really have that much of a winter anymore, so I don't really prefer the winter varieties. Plus, that's a really good cash crop at those shoulders of the seasons. And then also, in the wintertime as a farmer, if you're a diversified vegetable farmer, the wintertime is that downtime for most people. We're not growing anything in February. We're not growing anything in January. We may have some greens, but this is a really good high value cash crop that you can get started and then get that influx of cash flow in the spring and the fall. And again, we've got about 4 inches on this log. The wider the log, the longer you're going to have it. So about every inch is going to be a year of life for each log. So after this log is fully colonized, we've harvested over 3 years. You can still use it as firewood if you'd like to. It makes great kindling. It's still dry. And you've just utilized a species in your forest that typically wouldn't have a lot of value and increased your overall farm income.